Maybe you've had a few whiskeys and cocktails. Maybe you've had some whiskey straight at a bar or a friend's house, and now you're ready to purchase your first bottle of whiskey. Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Phil, and I'm going to fill you in about the best beginner whiskeys to drink neat. So a few years ago, I made a video about some recommendations for beginner whiskey, and I kind of disagree with some of my picks now, and that's partly because the price of whiskey's gone up, and also I think there are some better bottles of whiskey out there that will give you a much better chance to kickstart your whiskey journey. And that's partly because I've now seen so many people get into whiskey, and there's a few bottles that just keep coming up that seem to really hook people and are also quite approachable. So the first consideration for when you're buying your first beginner whiskey is to start with a more mild whiskey. These are those whiskeys bottled around 40% or 43%, because normally on this channel I recommend whiskies that are sort of 46% and beyond, but I think the big exception is when you're first getting into whiskey, it can be quite hard to get past that spirit burn, and if you can't get past the burn, it's really hard to see the flavor behind it. If that is you, I do recommend watching my 7 tips for getting past the burn video. That should really help you get through that and out into the magical world of flavor and complexity. The one thing I really notice with people getting into whiskey is that they'll find a whiskey they really like, they'll drink it, and then they'll buy the bottle again, and then they'll drink it again, then they'll buy a bottle again, and they won't really go out and explore other distilleries, types of whiskey, because, well, I mean, it makes sense, right? Because whiskey is an expensive hobby, and it's a big investment to take a risk on a distillery that, you might not know it's good. And that's why I would highly recommend these 3 categories of Scotch when you first start your whiskey journey. Some people say start with Scotch whiskey regions. I think there's too many exceptions to that. I think this is the best way to start it. And they are the Ex-Bourbon cask spirit forward whiskies. And then there's the ex-sherry cask styled whiskies. And these are ones that are aged in sherry soaked wood. Third big category of whiskey is the Peaty and Smoky whiskies. And I've kind of seen people who've started their whiskey journey go through all 3 doors. Some people start off with the smoky whiskies. Some people start off with the sherried whiskies. And the thing is, your tastes will vary. All your palates will be different. So I do really recommend trying at least all 3 categories before you completely rule out whiskey and you decide that you don't like it.
Disgusting.
And a great way to do this without buying the full bottles is go to your local bar first, working out whether you like these whiskies or not, or maybe you find a mate that can kind of go halves with you on a bottle and you can kind of do it that way. Now, if you want to get into whiskey, there's one major category within Scotch that I recommend you try, and those are the ex-bourbon cask styles of whiskey. These are the ones that will give you some vanilla notes, caramel notes, and will be a little bit more spirit forward, meaning the cask isn't as intense on the spirit, so the spirit can speak a little louder. Now, the first whiskey within this category I'd recommend is this one here, the Glenlivet 12. This is fantastic for people who are beginners to drinking whiskey neat. It's also one of the whiskeys that helped kickstart my whiskey journey. It's really light, it's got a lot of those white fruit notes. It's also just everywhere, you can find it in bars, you can find it in pubs. You don't need to commit to the full bottle. You can go out and try it, I don't know, somewhere local to you. There are 2 other whiskies I often recommend alongside this if you can't find this one, and that is the Glenmorangie 10 and the Glenfiddich 12. Both of those are also going to be really nice, approachable whiskies. Now, another whiskey, if you've got a little bit more budget, I've given to people who don't drink whiskey, and it's the whiskey that people go, wow, this is good. I can see myself liking this. I can see myself liking whiskey.
I could get used to this.
And that is the Dalwhinnie 15. Yeah, there's a lot of those same white fruit notes and buttery notes. And it even says on the top of it that it's the gentle spirit. And it is. And I think partly this is because it's one of the highest distilleries in Scotland, meaning the climate's a lot cooler, but it's also a 15-year-old. So it has a lot more time to marinate in those casks slowly. And it gives us a really nice, light and approachable spirit. So if budget's not an issue, you really want to give Scotch a really good chance, this will be the one I would go for. My next whiskey I'm going to recommend within this category is kind of a little bit left field because it does use some ex-sherry casks. Actually, pretty sure the Glenlivet does as well. And it's the whiskey that I find bourbon drinkers who don't really drink single malt, it's the whiskey that they like the most. It's a single pot still Irish whiskey called the Redbreast 12. This one is such a light and approachable whiskey, which is perfect for people who are beginners and wanting to get into whiskey. And part of the reason that this is so approachable is that it's an Irish whiskey, and with Irish whiskey, it's often triple distilled.
Distilling it not once, not twice, but 3 times in our copper pot stills, the mark of a traditional Irish whiskey. That 3rd distillation adds the extra smoothness.
Each time whiskey's gone through the distillation process, more of those heavier compounds have been removed. So this one's had a lot of those heavier compounds taken out of it, leaving us with these really nice, light and approachable flavors. It can be quite expensive as well. So another one I'd recommend is probably trying at a bar or something. So if you want to get into whiskey, one of the major categories I definitely think you should try is the ex-sherry cask styled whiskies. And these are whiskies that are aged in those sherry soaked wood. And that's going to give you a lot more of those nutty flavors, those dried fruit flavors, and those spice flavors. And one of the best whiskies I've seen for beginners that use some of these ex-sherry casks is the Aberlour 12. So this is just a fantastic, well-rounded whiskey which uses some ex-sherry cask. It also uses some ex-bourbon casks, but I do find this is a little bit more sherry forward than say the Glenlivet 12 or the Redbreast 12. So it's a great whiskey to try if you want to explore this category. It's also only bottled at 40%, so it's pretty approachable. There's not going to be a lot of whiskey burn. So it's a great one to try neat if you're not used to drinking neat. But if you want to try a whiskey that's aged solely in ex-sherry casks, it is also still quite approachable. I would recommend the Tamdhu 12. It will give you a lot more of those kind of dried fruit flavors, the spice flavors, the nutty flavors. So if you want to get into whiskey, the next major category you should definitely try are the Smoky and Peaty whiskies. These are whiskies that are basically smoked peat. The smoke is infused with the barley and then it goes through the whole whiskey making process and it retains that sort of smoky flavor. Now, a lot of you probably will say,
no, you shouldn't recommend smoky or peaty whiskies for beginners. You know, like that's for more advanced whiskey drinkers. You should recommend the ex-sherry cask whiskies, the ex-bourbon cask whiskies.
And I actually disagree, because what got me into whiskey is the smoky whiskies. We all have different palates, and some of you might already be used to eating smoky foods and you're used to smoky flavors. And what's hard about drinking whiskey is actually the spirit burn. And one of the whiskies I think is great for getting past that spirit burn is this one here, the Lafroig 10. This whiskey is the whiskey that got me into whiskey. It's only bottled at 40%, so it's pretty approachable. But also, I find the smokiness almost hides some of that spirit burn. And for some of you, this will be a great gateway into Scotch. And for others of you, you'll hate it. You'll absolutely dislike it. It's a very divisive whiskey. Now, another great beginner whiskey if you want to get into the smoky and peaty style of Scotch is this one here, the Lagavulin 16. The only thing I'd say about this, it did really help me get into whiskey, but it's getting very, very expensive. Diageo just keep putting their prices up more and more and more. Especially for this bottle. I'm kind of starting to recommend other whiskies now to this one. And for beginners, you don't want to splash out hundreds and hundreds of dollars on your first bottle. So another one I recommend is actually a sister distillery to Lagavulin. It's the Coolila 12. Also smoky. It's bottled at 43%. It's going to be quite approachable. But more and more, I've hosted a few whiskey tastings. And a whiskey I've been really surprised about how much beginners love, and it's also smoky and down the road from Lagavulin, is this one here, the Kilchoman Sinag. So it is 46%, but it's aged in some mixed sherry casks and it is smoky, and both those things will help you get past that spirit burn. Basically, it's become my new Lagavulin 16. So once you've explored these whiskies, there's so many other directions you can go down. And what I would say is once you've got past that spirit burn that you get when you're a beginner, when you've tried a few 40% whiskies, I would definitely recommend trying some of those more complex 46% whiskies. Like if you're into the ex-bourbon casks, more forward whiskies, try the Glencadam 10, try the Altmore 12, the Deanston 12, or the Arran 10. If you like more the sherry cask forward whiskies, you could try the Glenallachie 12, especially the more recent versions, or the Bunnahabhain 12. If you like the smoky direction, you could try the Port Charlotte 10, the Ardbeg 10, or even the Kilchoman Loch Gorm. If you want to look at other ways for building your whiskey collection, go watch my 15 Essentials Whiskey video. But don't let me prescribe your journey. We all have different palates, and that's why I wanted to show you a variety of whiskies in this video. But what was the whiskey that got you interested in whiskey? Or what is the whiskey you would recommend to a beginner? Write a comment down below, and while you're down there, give it a like, subscribe. Thanks to my patrons for making this video possible, and above all, make sure you share and enjoy. Beauty.